Hello guys, Omni here. Ever since I posted my review Friday night for Terminator Dark Fate, the more I start to think I was a little too easy on it. I think I was honestly blinded and given a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because I think objectively it's still the best film we've had since T2. But honestly, the more I think about it, even though it's the better film, it's the worst Terminator movie since T2 because it forgets so many things that has been established in the previous movies. And I'm not talking about the ones that it retcons. I'm not talking about Terminator 3, Salvation, or Genesis. I'm talking about the movie this directly follows up. Terminator 1, Terminator 2. There's things that are established in that is still part of this universe's canon. This movie either completely forgets or chooses to ignore, as well as some decisions that just really makes me scratch my head the more I think about it. And I've watched a lot of people talk about this film too in the past couple of days, trying to help gauge my thoughts on it. It was like, make sure I'm not just crazy. I'm not the only one feeling this way. And I still would stand by my rating on the film. I'd still give it a 7 out of 10. I'd stand by my tweet I made on Variety's article talking about how this movie is projecting to lose $100 million based on its current pull in the box office, as well as how much marketing and budget has been spent to put this film out there for everybody. So things aren't looking good, even though reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are fairly mild and not bad, actually. But that aside, everybody's saying the same thing. It's not a bad movie. It's just a really bad Terminator movie. And let's start right at the beginning with the very first decision this movie starts to make. And it's what I mentioned in my review. This video is going to be all spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to have it spoiled, go out, come back, because I'm diving into it right now. As I said in my review, this movie makes a decision in the first 10 minutes that's either going to have you on its side or it's not. And like I said, this is going to be a Last Jedi kind of thing for the fandom, and it's going to split people. And honestly, from what I've seen, it's not that split. It seems almost unanimous that this movie is alienating any Terminator fans. Because in the first 10 minutes of this movie, I talk about a scene where we have some awesome de-aging. Well, we de-age not just Sarah Connor, as I stated, but John Connor as well. Edward Furlong's John Connor. 1 year later from the events of T2, down a beach in Guatemala. Just having a gay old time, having a good time, sipping away, hitting on some ladies, and what happens? Oh, just Arnold shows up and shotguns a kid. I'm not talking about John Connor, adult John Connor. I'm not talking about little 20s John Connor. I'm talking about 1 year from we see him in Terminator 2. He is still a kid, and he gets double tapped in the chest from a shotgun. This movie completely just takes a dump on Terminator 2 and everything that it did. And furthermore, by making it completely pointless by the fact that everything they did in Terminator 2 didn't matter in the end. It undid nothing. And we'll get into that here in a minute, because that's even more hilarious when we start to talk about that. Now, the fact that they kill off John Connor, of course, they want to reset this. They want to Force Awakens this by making the same movie we've seen 100 times with this franchise. They send somebody back to protect somebody to get them through from a Terminator helping them. And we have a good Terminator, bad Terminator, blah, blah, blah. It's T1 and T2 combined into one movie. And it just moves on forward. And we get except in this time, unlike The Force Awakens, which I think actually gave us some characters, aside from, I do like the portrayals in this. I do think Natalie does a really good job playing Danny Ramos in this. Even though she doesn't have a lot to do, and she really doesn't have a whole lot of growth in this. She is just a proxy. As they even say, using the movie's own words, she's just the new John Connor. It's not her womb that is important. She's not the next mother of the savior. She's not going to give birth to the man that saves us. And I don't like to harp on anything for being like woke or anything like that, because honestly, most things aren't that are being, attributed to that. This just seems irrelevant. And I don't have a problem with it being a woman. I would have preferred Sarah Connor. I always thought of Sarah Connor as the primary character, not John. She's the strongest character in the franchise. She was the reason I think the Resistance even had a chance. If John Connor even went on to actually become the Resistance leader, it was all in part to having such a powerful, strong figure of a mother who trained him and got him ready for that role. Honestly, if it wasn't for Kyle Reese's involvement for telling Sarah to prep for that this is coming, I don't think John could have even survived. He would have just died. Of course. It's never been about that. Terminator's always been about Sarah. That's my point of view. And, that's where it always was the most interesting, was in the present day with what their legacy meant. And this just craps all over it, only to replace John with John, but a girl, Dani. She's just the new leader of the Resistance. And, that aside, I love Grace in this. She's awesome. I love her action. She does it so well. She plays this character really well. She the hybrid human Terminator that she is, the augmented human. I love that whole thing. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But the fact that they try to play off this high and mighty thing by just creating a John Connor proxy, it doesn't add up. Even though they stopped Skynet from existing in T2, you didn't have to kill John Connor. He fulfilled his role. Actually, he doesn't have a role to fulfill anymore. So him dying is completely pointless. He could have been there to help pass on his experience to Dani in all of this time. Think if we had Sarah Connor and an older John Connor mentoring her against this new AI that's not Skynet. We didn't have to kill John. You didn't. That aside, it makes no sense how that Terminator got there. So they kind of explain it away that Skynet shotgunned a bunch of Terminators all over the place, which honestly, when you start to think about it, is complete BS, because that cannot be the case. If they just shotgunned Terminators to multiple points in time, it starts to fall apart completely when you start to think of what the plots of the first two movies are. If they shotgunned them across time, then sending the T-800 that they reprogrammed in T2 to intervene in that time period in 97, it wouldn't have mattered. John would have died later. There would have been no point to send him there, because there would have been no point to send him there to protect him at that point if Skynet didn't know that their first Terminator failed when he attacked in the 80s. They would have had to know that didn't work, because they don't send a T-800 like they did in the first movie. They send their prototype model, an advanced model, to that specific timeline. But no, they just shotgun Terminators all over the timeline, but they only sent their best Terminator to 1997. You know why they did that? Because the first one failed. They got feedback that John Connor still exists, so they would have had to have sent their primary one there. Shotgunning him through time, honestly, the fact too, there's two ways this would have panned out. That Terminator would have had to have appeared near there if they were shotgunned through time. If he appeared there in that timeline at that point in Guatemala, knowing John Connor would be there to look for him, he would have had to have known the other two failed. Otherwise, why would John Connor be in Guatemala? If none of that panned out, he would have been dead and wouldn't be anywhere near there. They would have had that data that told him he was there. That aside, you can look on the flip side. Otherwise, he appeared at some unknown point, and he's just been roaming the earth trying to find John Connor until he somehow happened upon them in Guatemala when they are at a time where being off the grid actually meant something, and them being down there and finding them would have been completely impossible, whereas today's age it wouldn't have been. And then that begs the question, if they just shotgunned them all through time, were those Terminators that Sarah was executing, tracking down and executing in the later time and between John's death and where we find her in this time, were they all looking for John? I mean, we know she was able to kill them, so they would have had to have been Skynet models. So were they all just trying to find a John that doesn't exist? What would they have done? Would they have all become Carl after this point too? Would there just be a metric crap ton of Terminators just living among us with nothing to do? It makes no sense. It completely falls apart. It cannot have been shotgunned based on the logic of the first two movies. Otherwise, sending back the T-800 wouldn't have mattered. Sending back freaking the Kyle Reese wouldn't have mattered. They wouldn't have known to go to those points if they had known that they had just sprinkled them through time. Makes no sense. It's that or there's an army of T-800s just on Earth somewhere with no purpose from a future that no longer exists. And that aside, they changed the future. Skynet doesn't exist. Before we dive into Skynet, I want to talk about Carl. Now, they try to pass off this, right? That he, after killing John Connor, he starts to grow a conscience. He starts to learn. He starts to just blend in because he's no longer getting orders from Skynet because Skynet doesn't exist. Which begs the question, why in the first place? Anyway, can't have happened. That aside, he learns, he adapts, he can tell jokes. He's fun. I am extremely funny. He tells jokes. How did he learn exactly? Because T-800s can't adapt. They can't learn. They blend in. They can understand, but they can't learn new things. That was established in T2. They had to remove that inhibitor on his neural net processor, his learning computer, to allow him to learn new things, to give the thumbs up, to understand things, to implement that knowledge and adapt, learn humor, learn, innuendo, all that kind of stuff. He had to adapt and learn after they changed his chip. Before that, he was just straight-faced, no learning. He can understand what you're saying, but it's like, does not compute. Computer, illogical, love does not make sense, blah, blah, blah. He was dedicated. He was one note, one solid, one gear, just like Kyrie said. They cannot be bargained with. They cannot be reasoned with. They are just emotionless things, and he feels bad. Though no one messed with his CPU to allow him to learn anything even remotely close to emotions. But no. He has a dog. Don't worry. He has a dog too, which throughout the entire franchise have been used to find Terminators because dogs just straight up don't like Terminators. But that's how we know he's good. His dog likes him. His dog doesn't bark at him. That's how we know he's a good Terminator now. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. The dog likes him. And 3 months after he kills John Connor, he's like empathizes. Oh, what must Sarah Connor be feeling like? Like this woman I'm just going to apparently run in with. It just, I thought it was hilarious watching the movie. I thought it was just entertaining as crap watching the movie. But man, the more I think about it, I'm just like, that doesn't make sense. It was funny, but it makes no sense. What? Gosh. Another thing I wanted to talk about too is where are the Dysons? We could have had them in there. They could have even kind of been used as a kind of product because we know that the surviving Dysons were good with robotics, so maybe they could have been somehow unwittingly the precursors for Legion. We get no explanation except for just some other project, not Skynet, just comes up because man just has to keep tinkering with AIs and its military, and it goes rogue, and it does the exact same thing that Skynet does. It builds the exact same kind of robots that Skynet does. They're just mild variations. So Legion copyrighted just infringed on copyright couldn't think of its own ideas, but somehow managed to create the exact same type of things that Skynet did, and still even call them Terminators, even though they have different model names like Rev 9 and whatever the other ones are, because it really doesn't even go into it. But it's Legion. It's a whole other thing, but it is doing the exact things that Skynet did with very minuscule details. You're telling me that AIs, these future AIs that we build, inevitably will just design the exact same thing. It just doesn't make sense. It just falls apart completely unless, again, somehow the Dysons were involved and it has some kind of tie to the Skynet that didn't exist. Makes no sense. That aside, them sending Grace back, as much as I loved her character and loved everything that she did, I don't know what their long-term plan was. She was the most interesting new character, by the way, personally, that I thought. And that aside, Rev 9, I thought was a really cool concept. It was a marriage of the T-1000 and the T-800. It was just a T-800 who wears a T-1000. They can act autonomously or they can act, unified, but it was a cool concept. They have to check base every now and then. They can't stay separated, and they both have their own physical limitations, I guess. But it was interesting the way that dynamic played out. And Gabriel Luna was amazing. I'm not even going to deny that. He was really good. He did such a good job, especially when he had lines of dialogue. He was very charismatic. He wasn't terrifying. That's the one thing I'll say. He wasn't scary, and I think it was because of that charisma, where he doesn't quite live up to Robert Patrick in the first film. But that's neither here nor there. But here's the thing. Grace is sent back to protect Danny, right? And she says, when she starts to run out of energy and starts needing those meds to keep going, they sent her back knowing that. Have they ever killed a Rev 9? Has she ever actually successfully killed a Rev 9? Because she definitely, her plan was just to run from it. And then she says that, she can only fight a Terminator, what? It was 2 to 6 minutes, something like that. If you don't kill a Terminator within the first, I'm only designed to last to be able to go into sprints. She's like a robot cheetah. She can only last in short bursts. And she uses the excuse, if you don't kill a Terminator within so and so minutes, you're dead anyway. But her option was to beat it, knock it down, and run away. So her plan wasn't to defeat it. She was just going to run forever. Didn't seem like the best plan, because honestly, if she's only meant to last for a couple minutes, and if it wasn't for Sarah happening to be involved in this, she wouldn't have known what to do. She would have failed. If it wasn't for Sarah and Arnold's involvement, she would have failed. Danny and her would have both died. I don't know what their plan was except to fall back on getting Carl's help, to getting Arnold's help, because, and that's another thing. Well, how do they know about Carl? He doesn't live long enough to exist in that timeline. Unless before their interference, he just lived out his life in that cabin for all eternity. How did they know about Carl? How did they send her to that T-800? How did she know about him? I mean, she had the coordinates to his cabin on her stomach, but where did that come from? Was he still alive in their timeline? He shouldn't exist. And we're going to get to another point too. The fact of the matter is, this movie ends with the possibility that their haphazard destruction of these, not just, the Rev 9, because Arnold sacrifices himself at the end. The last Skynet model Terminator is destroyed at the end and melted. And unlike in T2, where they had that molten vat of metal that destroyed all of the evidence, because that was the whole point. Skynet no longer happened because there was no evidence left at the end of the film. Skynet came earlier because of the wreckage left of the fight with the Terminator in the first movie. Skynet ended up helping themselves speed up the impending Judgment Day from doing that. So them doing that here, guess what? There was no way for them to destroy the evidence, no way for them to destroy the bodies of either the Rev 9 from Legion or the T-800 from Skynet. Both of those technologies are now here in this dam in the middle of wherever the heck they are, and they just walk away and leave it. You know, some military organization is going to find that there. They don't destroy it. They don't dispose of it. They don't have anything that can destroy either of them. Some organization is going to come in like, huh, you know that thing they did in T2 and tried to avoid in T2 and successfully did and eradicated Skynet in T2 by doing? Yeah, let's not do that. Let's not only not do that, but let's leave behind technology from Skynet and technology from Legion for what has to at least be a worse version of the future now. The future has to be worse now because that's two different AI semblances, two evil AIs from two different timelines that they have technology of, that they can hybridize, that they can, you know, cannibalize and create something else from. Legion can't even only be the thing now in the future. Can't be the only one in the future now. It's got to evolve into something else. If it doesn't, then they completely just forgot that point from T2 and the end of the movie. Makes no sense that they didn't try to destroy the wreckage, the remnants. I mean, James Cameron says he has ideas for 2 sequels to this. So they have an idea for a direction to go with this, but honestly, it's all the same thing we've seen before, just irresponsibly handled and done just horribly. There's no logic to this. It makes no sense. Holy crap, man. It's been 22 minutes. I've been ranting about this. Jesus. Man, seriously. What's the next one going to be? Unless this is like how Legion gets started by being the hybrid. By their negligence in Grace's involvement, they did the T1 thing and caused Legion's birth. Because maybe Legion and the way their Terminators are made are because they are a hybrid between the Rev 9 and the T-800 from Skynet. And then again, you just end up with a whole other paradox. Because then that would just mean the Rev 9 is the product of the melding of those technologies, and it's not going to make anything better. Oh, time travel. Why? Christ. So, you know what? If they just wanted to do this for, like, you know, woo women, like, please, why couldn't we have just focused on Sarah Connor? Why couldn't we have just had Sarah be the one? Sarah was always the strong character in this. You know, the fact that she was the one, you know, I think, honestly, my theory on the whole thing is that Skynet's involvement in sending the Terminator back, not only did they somehow, you know, she had the DNA for John Connor, is what I'm going to go with, because the fact that John Connor is born, whether or not Kyle Reese has sex with Sarah Connor, is completely irrelevant, because in his timeline, John Connor still came to be. He would have had to have a completely different father, unless he knew, which then again comes into a paradox. It doesn't make sense. That's why time travel is just so hard to follow, and movies should just avoid it a lot of the time. But it makes for fun scenarios. And like that aside, like, you know, I think their involvement goes back, and not only do they create, you know, John Connor, she gives birth to John Connor because she had sex with Kyle Reese when he went back, and they created that time loop. But that aside, that also involvement made her into a warrior. She was a force to be reckoned with. She was a threat. She was the threat, not John. The fact that they even tried to kill not just her, but her future son. Like, even if you take John out of the picture completely, Sarah's a force. She is everything that you could have had. You could have passed on to be like, Sarah was the future resistance leader, something like that. That would have been a different way. And then, so that could have tied in. There's just, when we time skip to the future and Grace is the future leader, she just doesn't carry that kind of weight. It just seems kind of forced. I don't believe that character grows. The character we see in the present, I just don't see how she would turn into that. And I don't buy it. and it's hard to buy. Um, and honestly, there's a part of Grace's story too that makes me feel like because she saved me is why I volunteered to go back and save her. It almost feels like it was, Grace's bias towards Danny that she wanted to go back when they knew they were trying to assassinate her. I don't know. There was no reason to get rid of John. They could have passed the torch without killing John. I just don't. They could have just had the Connors and then Danny Ramos, and then mentor her into. If they had both mentored her, I would believe that. And maybe it's Sarah that helps her grow into that leadership role. But I just don't know. I don't know at this point. My cat's at the door trying to get into my office at this point for some reason. Guess I got her attention. Anyway, that's it. I don't know I can't really say anything else here. I think some of the things, especially in the beginning, there's been some interviews with Linda Hamilton that have started to come out, and her interviews are starting to sound a lot like Mark Hamill's after The Last Jedi. She does it may have just been a one-off, and maybe have been some twisting of some words, but doesn't seem like she's too happy with the way they handled the first bit of this film either. She doesn't like the way they depicted Sarah. And so we're getting some Jake Skywalker stuff going on here. Maybe we've got some Janice Connor. I couldn't think of another one, but I just went with a J name. So yeah, that's about it. That's all I can say about this at my point. I'm talking myself hoarse. So let me know your guys' thoughts. I don't know if anybody that's seen the film chime in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some fans out there that can defend this. I can't. Not anymore. I can defend it as an action film. I just can't defend it as a Terminator film. That's why it's a 7 out of 10. Good movie. Bad Terminator movie. That's it, guys. That's all I've got. I had to get this off my chest. I had to vent about it. So thank you guys for listening. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, support this video, please. Pass it around even. Let's spread the news about this because I want, if you're a Terminator fan, well, I think you should avoid it. I just do. We'll wait a couple years for them to try another Terminator 3 and see how that pans out. But thanks, guys. That's it for tonight. I'll catch you guys in the next one. And remember, fate is what you make it. Sarah said that. But they also forgot that. It's now Danny's saying. Danny invented that line, not Sarah. Anyway, take care, everybody.